Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, for sure, corporate earnings are still growing, real estate values move higher, and manufacturing activity has been robust, but now comes the harder part of this post-recovery economy. Which way and where to from here? Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and this time, what do we need to get right? And not just to avoid another slowdown, but rather what capital investments or improvements or broader policies now should be addressed. As we try to do each week, we will discuss the issues that matter most in our region. And later on, John Williams from Palmetto State manufacturer Domtar.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Chris MacDonald of the Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors, Rich Fletcher from the South Carolina I-77 Alliance, and special guest John Williams, CEO of Domtar. And now, here's Chris Williams.
Welcome to our program. Rich, Chris, good to have you both here, and welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You know, one of the common threads for you both, but certainly one of the largest policy issues now that's being debated last year, certainly this year, and it seems to be gaining momentum, is transportation. Not just South Carolina Department of Transportation or North Carolina Department of Transportation, but this whole idea that transportation is really code for economic development and all things beyond that. Rich, with your particular area of dominant influence, the 4 counties that are strung together on the I-77 corridor, transportation has got to be a top issue for you, but do you get the sense that the South Carolina State House has put a stake in the ground about transportation funding and getting maybe the formula right, but really being serious about fixing this issue?
Oh, absolutely. Transportation is critical for all of us in economic development. The manufacturing community relies on it. The interstate infrastructure is very critical, but also port and airport access are equally important. As you know, the South Carolina legislature has really prepared to deepen the Charleston Harbor with $300 million money set aside. And now this year they're looking to fix the interstate infrastructure and really bump up the funding for interstate and roadway funding throughout the state of South Carolina.
You know, I know, and sorry not to just go after you about this particular issue, but it sounds important and it is important, but how do, legislatively, how do lawmakers in South Carolina, and you're not going to get a pass here, Chris, by the way, how do legislators make that more important than things like, Medicaid expansion possibly in South Carolina or education funding? And do you think there will be momentum to really make some headway on transportation funding?
You know, the prioritization is a really tough question. I'm not sure how they go about the prioritization, but I do think highways will be a very major focus. It's a critical issue for the business community. It's critical for the citizens who commute on a daily basis, and really just the entire state is really coalesced around this issue.
Chris, in the Triangle, in places like Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, in places like Charlotte in North Carolina, congestion is an issue, and I know in Wake County you're involved in a transportation initiative. That's kind of a proxy for the other debates going on around transportation. Same question we were talking about, Rich. How do you get the sense that the General Assembly in North Carolina is going to prioritize transportation appropriately?
Well, that's a great question. I know that there's a lot of tax fights. There's funding is a huge issue as it goes to repairing our roads. It's funny, Secretary Fox came in NC State the other day and said, you know, the biggest thing that came out was you got to be creative when you think about raising that money and to get those revenues in for transportation. I know the Wake County Board of Commissioners are looking at a referendum in 2016 to help for public transportation.
Will that end up in a bond?
That will probably end up in a bond, probably expected November 2016 to be on the ballot.
How do you get creative about some of these things? How do you get creative in South Carolina?
Well, I think you look at York County, which is Rock Hill, Fort Mill, South Carolina. They've gone out and done a penny sales tax to really increase the road capacity in their community. That's one way to be creative.
Toll roads?
You can talk about toll roads. You know, there's a debate now about the gas tax. Do you increase that tax? That tax hasn't been increased in South Carolina for 20 years. No one wants a tax increase, but it's a priority to fund these roads, and so we've got to figure out ways to find the revenue to do it. Do you do public-private partnerships? There's all kinds of ways to get creative, I think.
Yeah, how do you get creative, Chris?
Well, example of creativity was a proposal that they would look at vehicle mileage tax, which I can't even imagine the amount of complications that would have. There's other ways to get creative as far as repairing our roads, looking at certain fees that 18-wheelers would have coming and using our interstates. You know, there's different ways. I think the good thing is they're starting the discussions, they're deliberating on possible solutions, and moving forward, we might hopefully have a good transportation revenue solution.
Let me ask you all one-off about your specific area of dominant influence. Rich, I'll come back to you. And is there a way, is not a priority, but a long simmering debate about the competition in economic development between North and South Carolina? North Carolina's mojo is tough to find right now in economic development. South Carolina's hitting on all 8 cylinders. You know, why would the Palmetto State work closely with the Tar Heel State when they don't, you know, really have anything to win here? Someone suggested, and actually Jim Newsom from the South Carolina Ports Authority said, maybe we need to carve out, and let's call it a headquarters zone in Charlotte, and make Charlotte, let's lean into that center of commerce and make Charlotte a headquarters zone and give both states the opportunity to work together on that area and somehow figure out a way to cross public policy lines and political lines. Right. Does something like that make sense?
I think there's a lot of ways that North Carolina and South Carolina can partner together, and I think they continue to talk about that. I think there will be continued movement. There are probably other ways that may not make sense, and so I think there's really a long-standing political differentiation between the two, and from a tax standpoint, you know, there are very good reasons to be in North Carolina. There are very good reasons to be in South Carolina, and there's always going to be that competition between them. But I also think there's a lot of instances where they work together to try to find common issues. When we talk to companies all over the world, a lot of people don't know South Carolina or North Carolina, but they kind of get the concept of the Carolinas. And so in that way, it makes sense to kind of market yourself as part of the Southeast, as part of the Carolinas, because people don't understand the difference between Fort Mill and Charlotte and Raleigh and Columbia.
Right, yeah, okay, more to come on that. As a one-off, Chris, in real estate, certainly the real estate market has come back. One of the subgroups in real estate is the apartment home business. Is that being overbuilt at this point?
I don't think it's being overbuilt. It's certainly accommodating for the amount of growth that's going on right now. I'm personally from the North originally, and there's a lot of us that are coming to the Carolinas to do business, to set up. The quality of life is huge. I know that there's been a lot of talk about the millennials coming into the Triangle area, and a lot of the millennial type mindset is moving into the apartments, wanting everything walkable, wanting to have your restaurants, your shows to go to, all within walking distance. So the apartment market is certainly accommodating to a lot of millennials, and also I'd say the retirees as well. Yeah. It's just the simplified life of just being able to walk everywhere.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. We're going to bring our guest on in just a second. Next week on this program, he's been here before, he'll be here next week, and there's certainly never a shortage of things to talk about in the healthcare business. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the largest healthcare provider in the Carolinas, and one of the largest in this country. His name's Michael Tarwater. And Michael will be our guest. Michael is with the CEO with the healthcare system, Carolina's healthcare system. And then in 2 weeks, Lindsey Bierman, the relatively newly minted Chancellor of the UNC School of the Arts out of Winston-Salem, will be here. You know, it may be the largest corporate citizen in the Carolinas you've never heard of, hidden in plain sight in Fort Mill, South Carolina. Domtar, with annual revenue close to $5.5 billion now, is one of the country's largest manufacturers of pulp and paper products. Joining us now is Domtar President and Chief Executive Officer, John Williams. John, welcome to the program.
Chris, thank you very much. Good morning.
4 years in the Carolinas, John. Did I misrepresent that to say that you're the largest corporate citizen that many people have never heard of?
I think that's a fair representation. I mean, we still have an office, obviously, up in Montreal, so we're split slightly in terms of head office. So, yeah, most people have not heard of us. It's an awkward name, too, to be honest. So that makes
What
sense.
does it mean?
It actually was founded in 1848. It means the Dominion Tar and Rubber Company, founded by the British. And now, some 170 years later, we have another Brit. So there it is.
Yeah, running the joint, right?
Indeed.
So manufacturing, obviously.
Indeed.
Paper products, old line business to some degree. Will manufacturing ever be as a percentage of this economy as it was in the past? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't think it'll be the same as it was in the past, to be absolutely frank. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It just is what it is based on the modern world. I think one of the things manufacturing can do, however, is it creates a lot of jobs where people can progress. You know, they can join a paper mill, they can move up into supervisory positions, they get good jobs and a good lifestyle. So if you think of the political environment today where we're talking about the middle class and what's happened to the middle class, I think manufacturing jobs are a key driver of some of the mobility actually that you can see.
When you hear some of the dialogue, John, and read some of the news reports about manufacturing in this country, manufacturing in the Carolinas, do you think it's accurate? And let me say it this way. You know, a lot of folks have said, you know, manufacturing, it's gone, it's not going to happen. That doesn't sound like it's completely true. This is not meant to be a leading question, but what do you think is misrepresented about manufacturing?
Well, I think it's seen as sort of old-fashioned somehow. I obviously deeply resent that because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I think we do some cutting-edge things. Yeah. And I think there are lots of things in people's lives that look very simple, like a piece of paper, that actually, if you look at that supply chain, it's both a complex and fairly technical supply chain to deliver that piece of paper to your photocopier or to make that book that you read or whatever it may be. So I just think there'll be new products, and when there are new products, they'll be manufactured. I think that's the way I see it. And people are going to be much more careful about their supply chain now. The world's a difficult place, so I think supply chains are going to come back to the U.S.
What does that mean exactly?
If you look at geopolitical risk out there right now, and you think about where people are manufacturing certain products, take, you know, what's happening in the West Coast ports right now, for example, you know, those supply chains that are so stretched, I think people are going to say, I'm going to want to bring back to the U.S. some of the key components of that supply chain that really make me competitive. So I think you're going to see some repatriation. I don't think it's going to be a flood, but I think you are going to see some.
Rich, question?
Yeah, John, manufacturing is really seem to be getting a lot of press lately about reshoring. But really, from your standpoint, what is creating the market in the U.S. right now? Is it the geopolitical instability, or are there other factors at play?
Well, I think there are two things. There's the marketplace, and there's obviously where you then choose to manufacture based on that marketplace. So, you know, we have a large U.S. marketplace. What we manufacture is fairly expensive to ship, and we can be very competitive globally, actually out of the Carolinas, you know, shipping all over the world. So I'll give you one good example. We make a product called fluff pulp, which comes from loblolly pine. We manufacture it up in Plymouth in Washington County. And when you look at that product, we ship 80% of that out of a U.S. port into China and Europe and the Far East. So I think, you know, there are plenty of things in our industry where the U.S. can be highly competitive and actually be an exporter. Even in the containerboard business, so the paper used for boxes, you see a lot of that going offshore as well. So I think U.S. just has to be competitive. And if we're competitive, you know, we'll have the jobs.
Yeah, I had a question about the tablets and technology and what this is actually doing to the paper industry, and if there's going to be a sustained market moving forward for paper.
Well, very good. I can move on to world hunger, I think, on that one. So if you look at it, our grade, so we make what is called uncoated free sheet. So it's what you put through your photocopying machine, etc. It is declining on average by about 3 to 5% a year. So that means if you look at that, since I joined in 2009, on those commodity grades, we've lost about 33% of our business.
Wow.
However, what that has also meant is that we've had to be very careful with our sort of supply-demand balance, and we've repurposed a number of our facilities to sort of make sure that, you know, we can still make money from making pulp. But I mean, that's the challenge. It is not a growth business.
So what do you do? How do you diversify? How do you find a growth business?
Well, so the pulp business, where we're a large manufacturer, probably close now to about 1.6 million tons of pulp, is a GDP growth business, Chris. So it grows at about 1 to 2% a year, year after year after year. We've also diversified. We've diversified into baby diapers. So we make baby diapers now, and we make adult incontinence products, where the demographics are obviously very strong for both those products. So that's what you have to do. You have to look at places where you can build your business, where you get some growth. So adult incontinence globally is about a $9 billion market, growing at 5%. Well, you know, we can build a strong position there. So we bought a business in Greenville, and now we have...
Greenville South or North?
Greenville North. And now we have businesses in Sweden, in Spain, in Ohio, and also in Waco, Texas. So, you know, we built $1 billion business from basically nothing 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do.
John, there's been a lot of talk recently about the strengthening dollar and how it impacts the global economy. How does it impact Domtar?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt we sell pulp in dollars. So if the dollar gets too strong, there's a little bit of price pressure in the pulp business. And obviously imports on paper, you know, when they see that, those imports will come in. So right now, actually, we've launched a trade case against several countries who we believe are dumping into the US. And they're obviously helped, aided and abetted, I guess I would say, by a high dollar.
Okay. Chris? Do you find it diverse throughout the United States when you're doing business and trying to hire new employees? That actual quality of life has an effect on the way that the workforce morale and ethics?
That's a very interesting question. So let's talk about the paper business particularly. Typically, a paper mill is probably in a small town. It's reasonably isolated, and it's probably well over 50% of the tax take of the small town, in some cases even more. So that means that, you know, people will get a high quality of life. They'll make reasonable money. We've actually just launched a campaign called Paper Made Here, which is about paper made in America. And on our website, there's a wonderful video of a gentleman who works for us in our Marlboro mill in Bennettsville here in South Carolina. And when you hear him talk about what this job has meant to him for his family and the stability it's given him, having left the Marines, I think there's no doubt that employees really are motivated by that experience. I think as the employer, our responsibility is to make sure we stay competitive enough that those jobs still exist. Because when you shut a paper mill in a small town, you have annihilated the town. I mean, the tax base is gone, house prices fall by 40%. So
have you had to do that?
We have, unfortunately.
How many times?
Certainly in Canada and a number of places, probably 4 or 5 times. And in the US, we've had to downsize. So take our Plymouth mill. We stopped manufacturing paper, but we spent about $85 million actually to be able to make more fluff pulp. So some jobs went, but on a long-term basis, the mill is still sustainable.
So yeah, John, so in the mind of a CEO, when you're making a decision collectively within your organization to say, you know, we're going to have to shutter this or consolidate that, how much weight do you put on the impact of a community? And not to say that you can't make a clinical decision, you know, good for shareholders.
It's always extraordinarily difficult because these are people's life. You know, these are communities that are, you know, are going to struggle depending on how isolated they are. So we will put in an awful lot of counseling. We'll make certain that, you know, we have career fairs. I'll give you some examples. We've had to shut some mills in Wisconsin maybe 7 or 8 years ago. 3 years later, pretty much everybody had a job. And we follow that very carefully because I think public reputation is everything. you don't want to be that company that people say, well, they just left me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Rich?
Throughout the globe, we're seeing sustainability, particularly in Europe, is becoming a huge issue. I know Domtar has a big belief in sustainability, but what kind of impact does that have on your business?
Well, we call ourselves the Sustainable Paper Company, so we're very, very focused on that. Everything from sort of responsible forestry, we're FSC certified, so we make sure that, our wood is coming from sustainable forest. We're very careful about emissions. 76% of our power, actually, we generate ourselves. I think there are two things. In the world of transparency that technology has given us, you must not imagine this is a marketing issue. This is actually a behavioral issue. You have to behave in a sustainable fashion, and then you can tell the world you're doing it. If you just think this is kind of lipstick on the pig at the front end of your business, and behind in your business, you're still behaving appallingly, my view is you kind of deserve everything you get, actually. So we're very focused on making certain that we behave in a sustainable way. So, we partner up, for example, in Fort Mill, we partnered up with the Greenway. And not only do we give them money, but every year we all go and dig trenches and we go and sort of dig paths and sort of make sure that, we're actually getting involvement. And we have sort of three key values. So one of them is agility, one is innovation, one is caring. And the caring piece is really about interacting effectively with the communities that we operate in. So we're very, very focused on sustainability. We have a relationship with the WWF, and we have a relationship with the Rainforest Alliance. And these people will not partner up with companies that they don't consider to be.
And you don't mean the World Wide Wrestling Federation?
I do not, no. Is there such a thing? The English don't know about this, by the way.
It's sort of like rugby.
Oh, it's one of, okay, fine. A minority sport. Thank you so much.
We have a couple minutes left, go ahead.
So talking about sustainability, and a lot of companies are adopting this paperless type policy. Is that going to be having an adverse effect on your?
Well, it's sort of interesting, isn't it? So of course I have a few investments, and they're with the usual large banks, and every time I get an envelope it says go paperless. I wish they could somehow work out sort of, but I really don't want to receive those things. If you look at it, I think, carefully, most of the time I think this is an economic choice. This is really about taking costs out of their own business under the guise of let's not use paper.
Okay.
Because the argument actually environmentally is not a sound argument.
We didn't get a chance to talk about transportation. You've talked around it, but with your plants in different spots, with access to ports, John, over-the-road transportation, how important is it for Domtar, how important is it for you to be engaged in a policy debate around transportation?
Well, it's extremely important. So actually I'm up in Washington, D.C. next week talking about the transportation bill. The big issue for us is truck weights, because obviously paper or pulp's fairly heavy. So very often we weigh out before we pack out, which means actually sort of half-empty trucks are disappearing hither and yon. So for us, it's important that, can we actually get those truck weights up? We're also big rail users, so it's also important there that, we make sure we get the rail cars we need. That's been more of a challenge for us actually in Canada than it is in the US because of all the rail cars going into oil and gas. So that's really it for transportation. And then, of course, the basic, we just need infrastructure, roads that work, where truck drivers aren't stuck for 2 hours in the morning in the rush hour.
There's, we talked a little bit about it at the beginning of the program. Transportation, we got about a minute left. Transportation it seems like it's important, but when you weigh it against education or healthcare, all of a sudden it doesn't become important. But what do you think is misunderstood about transportation? It's more than roadways, I would guess.
Yeah, I have two things. Obviously, it's airlines. It's can you fly where you want to fly without massive delays. It's all that. It's shipping. It's the freedom of the seas. It's making sure you haven't got pirates just outside territorial waters as you do in certain parts of the world. I think there's an awful lot to it. I think, to be honest, it's the old challenge politically, is that this is the boring skeletal infrastructure that enables the economy to operate, and there aren't that many votes in it. Because I don't think the average voter, as they're going through the polling booth, is sitting there thinking, I must have the roads. I think it's a business issue, and that makes it much more complicated.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you. Please come back, would you?
I'd love to. Thank
now
you
that
very
you
much
live
indeed.
down here full time.
Indeed.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Nice to see you, John.
Thank you.
Chris, welcome. Good luck with the transportation issue in the Triangle. Congested to say the least, and no more to come on that.
Well, thanks, Chris.
And Rich, welcome to the Carolinas. I know you went to North Carolina, UNC.
As
maybe.
I got my master's there, yes.
And that could be dangerous in South Carolina when you start talking about the Carolinas, but that's a...
But I went to Ohio State as an undergrad. No one around here likes the Ohio State,
Right,
so.
yeah. Until next week, good night. I'm Chris. See you.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.